Undisturbed natural forests are incredible places. I think we can all agree with that. If ever you've had the luck to go to one where there's been minimal human intervention, they are incredible places. And if we hadn't have arrived, there'd be bison everywhere and all of these large herbivores. But humans did arrive about 45,000 years ago. About 7,000 years ago, the forest reached its maximum extent in Europe, but it's been largely declining over the last 4,000 years since then, largely due to human influences. Okay, so what we're left with now is about 2% of the forest cover in Europe can be described as natural. We're using this word natural here, but really this is what we mean by undisturbed. You'll also hear primary or old growth and all of these terms that are coming across from other parts of the world. But of the 40% cover in forest cover in Europe, only 2% of that is natural, and 90%, 98% of the other forests are either semi-natural or planted. They've all had some kind of human intervention. And so I would argue that semi-natural forests, which have been heavily disturbed, are amazing too. I took this picture literally last weekend. I was out hiking with my daughter up in the Cairngorms in the north of Scotland, which is where I'm from. And this forest that you can see here used to be a hunting and forest estate. There were no young trees had grown on it for about 100 years. So those big old trees that you can see were the only trees that were there. And it was decimated by browsing and by logging over multiple years. What's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is largely the hunting regime has changed from being hunting for sport to hunting to control the deer so that the trees can regrow. And you can see hopefully in the picture, lots of small trees are now regenerating now. And I've seen this in my lifetime. I've been going to these forests for the last 30 years. So this is a very disturbed area. There's been lots of disturbance in these areas, and yet it is delivering more and more nature and other things now. So what are the disturbances that we're talking about when I talk about undisturbed versus disturbed forests? It's quite simple. We disturb trees by cutting trees down, by planting trees, and by controlling deer. There's other things that happen as well, but that's largely the tools that foresters use. Oops, sorry. But then nature does her thing as well. This was from Storm Arwen 2 years ago, huge storm that hit the northeast of Scotland. And we're seeing, as all of us are in Europe, a great change in natural disturbances that are taking place. So what we know now is that the conditions that our forests grew up in are not the conditions that our forests will grow old in. The conditions our forests grew up in are not the conditions that they'll grow old in. Therefore, the sort of forests that happen naturally and develop through natural regeneration based on maybe what was there 4,000 or 5,000 years ago aren't necessarily the forests that are going to be the best adapted for the climate that is to come and that we are already starting to experience. So we can look ahead and help the forests to adapt as we restore them. And the reason that I'm here is there's a big Horizon 2020 project that I'm working on called Superb, which is looking at this whole concept of adaptive restoration. The other sort of disturbance I want to talk about is the times that we get it wrong. And here's one of those dreadful, and I will say dreadful, forests planted on peatland, again in the north of Scotland, in the Flow Country. These forests were planted at the time for what people thought were the right reasons. We were short of wood, the land was unproductive, and people, just as they were doing in Estonia, wanted a productive use of the land. And so these trees were planted. But we would look at this now and see the value of this wetland is much, much greater as a peatland than it is with trees. So the restoration action here is by no means a natural forest. The restoration is to go restore the peatland and to get it functioning again. The project that I work on, if you get the slides back, I think they're getting circulated. These are the sorts of levels that we can intervene at in order to get nature working again in these forests. And these are the sort of techniques that we are using to get closer to nature with our forestry, recognize people are at the heart of are part of things, be conscious of things like genetics, protect key features, protect those natural forests and mimic smaller disturbances. And that last point there, which says diversity and number of scales, the thing about forestry is it works at the tree level, the stand level, the forest level, the landscape level, and the national level. And all of these scales need to work together in order to get the most nature-rich outcome, which I think is the right thing. We do also need wood. We can't ignore the fact that we need wood. And if we do not produce wood in Europe, we're going to be exporting our problems elsewhere. We can produce wood and produce nature from the land that we have. That's been proven over thousands of years. It's very similar to close to nature farming as well. So my argument then is that we need to move to nature-rich forests. Truly natural forests must be protected, but we can adapt how we do, and we can learn from how we manage forests and projects like Superb in order to bring nature back into more multifunctional forests across Europe. So my argument, my response to the myth is that nature-rich forests must be the target for restoration in Europe.